Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back. A little while ago I made a bolognese sauce with some impossible meat, and it worked so surprisingly well that it got me thinking, how hard would it be to make a bolognese sauce that's totally vegetarian and is still just as satisfying and hearty to eat? So this recipe I'm going to show you today is the culmination of those efforts, and it's really good. I'm really happy with how it came out. So meat eater or otherwise, stick around. I think you'll like this one. So the first thing I did there was throw some olive oil into my preheating Dutch oven over about medium-high heat. And today I'm going to be using a pound of Beyond Beef for this. You can use Impossible Beef, Beyond Beef, it doesn't really matter. Any of those will work. While that preheats, I'm going to start working on my modified mirepoix. The first and kind of main modification that I'm going to make to my mirepoix is instead of onions, I'm going to use leeks. I'm using leeks because they have properties that will help thicken the sauce later and bring an unctuous, kind of sticky texture to it, similar to the way a good animal stock fortified with gelatin would. So I'm slicing these up fairly fine. I don't want the pieces of leek to be a huge textural component in the end, so I'm going to slice them up pretty fine, and I'm only slicing up the white and the light green parts. The dark green parts at the top are really woody and fibrous and pretty much inedible, so I wouldn't use them for this application, although you can save them to flavor a stock or a soup or something later. One thing about leeks is that they tend to have a lot of sand hiding between the layers, so it's important that we give these pieces a good wash, not that they're all chopped up. Originally, I was going to do this in my salad spinner, but then I realized I chopped these up a little too small for that, and they would probably just fall through the straining basket that comes with the salad spinner. So instead, I'm going to put these pieces into a bowl, and then I'm going to fill the bowl with water. The leeks will float in the water, and then after you give them a quick swish, all the sediment will sink to the bottom. So after it all settles out, you can just lift the clean pieces of leek out from the top. All right, my Dutch oven is preheated now, so I'm going to throw my Beyond Beef in. I'm going to break that up a little bit with my wooden spatula, but I'm not going to go crazy on it yet. I'm basically just breaking it up enough to get it in an even layer on the bottom of the Dutch oven. Once I've done that, I'm going to hit it with some salt and pepper, and then I'm going to let it sit undisturbed so that it can develop a lot of good color on the bottom. Okay, back to my mirepoix. I'm going to finely mince up 2 stalks of celery, and then I'm going to do just 1 carrot. For a normal bolognese, for my mirepoix, I would do the carrots and celery in more of a one-to-one relationship with one another. But one thing I've noticed about fake meat products is that they tend to be a bit sweeter than their real counterparts. And since carrots will bring additional sweetness and celery provides kind of an earthy bitterness, I'd rather err on the side of more celery than carrots for this so that I don't overdo it with the sweetness. Now that the Beyond Beef has browned, I'm going to break it up into a finer texture, and to do that, I'm going to use this potato masher that I have. This is a really cheap one, probably like $5 that I bought from the supermarket many years ago. It bends constantly, but you know what? It still does this job way faster than I ever could with the wooden spoon, so I keep it around. I'm going to give that a couple more minutes to brown, so in the meanwhile, I'm going to fish my leeks out of this water bowl here and combine them with my celery and carrots so that it's all ready to go. It's okay if the leeks are still kind of wet because I'm not trying to brown any of these veggies when they go in the pot. I'm basically just trying to sweat them out and soften them, so a little bit of moisture isn't going to hurt them. Alright, now in goes the mirepoix with another couple pinches of salt and some black pepper, and I'm just going to stir that in to combine and let everything sweat and soften. While that gets going, I'm going to chop up some garlic. I'm using 5 cloves of garlic today, but use however much you want. There really is no right or wrong with how much garlic you put in this. And this isn't really part of the recipe, but I had half a shallot left over from something else, so I'm going to chop that up and throw it in too. Anytime I'm planning out a meal or a recipe, I always try to take inventory of the odds and ends that are floating around in the fridge, so that when I have the opportunity to use these things, I actually do, and I can minimize food waste that way. Alright, my mirepoix has been sauteing for about 7 or 8 minutes, and it's all looking pretty well softened now, so I'm going to put in my next ingredients, which is going to be about 3 tablespoons of tomato paste, and then all my garlic from earlier. I'm going to give all that a couple more minutes to saute so that the tomato paste has a chance to brown a little bit. And in the meanwhile, I'm going to grate in some fresh nutmeg and add some dried thyme. Alright, now it's time to deglaze with about half a cup of wine. I'm using a Chianti today, but you can use basically any wine you want, so long as it's dry. You could even use a white wine if you wanted to. You also don't have to be overly concerned with the quality of wine that you're using for this. This is like a $20 bottle of wine, so it's by no means fancy, but if you want to use a boxed wine or some 2-buck chuck, that'll be just fine too. I just don't really tend to keep wine specifically for cooking around or anything like that, so I just put in a splash of whatever I'm drinking. So I'm going to let that wine cook down until it's basically all evaporated, which really doesn't take very long, just 1 or 2 minutes. And then I'm going to put in about 2.5 to 3 cups of vegetable broth. Make sure that when you're choosing a broth for this, that you go with a reduced or even better, a no sodium option. This is going to reduce a lot, so if you don't, it can get too salty on you really fast. And I almost forgot, but in order to bump up the savoriness of this just a little bit more, I'm going to add a couple tablespoons of soy sauce. This isn't going to be enough to make it taste like soy sauce, but it will contribute to the overall depth and richness of the whole thing. So that's everything that's going into the pot for now. I'm just going to bring this up to a simmer and then let it go uncovered on low heat for about an hour so that all the flavors in there can meld and so the sauce can reduce and thicken. So here we are about an hour later. I just moved the pot to the back of the stove to make myself a little bit more room, and you can see there just how thick our sauce has gotten. It looks almost too thick at this point, like it hardly even looks like a sauce anymore, but that's okay because we're going to be thinning it back out with a couple upcoming ingredients still. First of which is going to be some milk, about half a cup of whole milk. And I'm adding it now as opposed to earlier because the long cooking time would have made the milk much more likely to curdle. Now that the sauce is basically done, now's a good time to get a pot of heavily salted water boiling for my pasta. While that heats up, I'm going to prepare my last couple ingredients that I'm going to use to help finish the pasta, which is going to be some parsley that I'm going to mince up fairly fine, and some Parmesan cheese that I'm going to rip on a microplane. Alright, my water's boiling, so I'm going to throw my pasta in now. I'm using this cascatelli, this new trendy shape. Is it still trendy? I have no idea, but it's really good. I like it a lot. But really any thick-cut, hearty shape is going to go great here. So another good choice would be rigatoni. You could use pappardelle. You could even use penne, you know, if you're a sicko. The box for this cascatelli says to cook it for 13 to 15 minutes, so I'm going to let it go for about 10 in the water, so that gives me a few minutes for it to finish in the sauce later. As another kind of impromptu addition, I decided I wanted to throw a couple tablespoons of butter into my sauce. The butter is going to help bring back some of the richness that we're missing out on here by not using any meat. Alright, my pasta is a couple minutes away from al dente now, so I'm going to reserve about a cup of this pasta cooking water, and then I'm going to drain off the rest. So now in with my pasta goes a couple tablespoons of olive oil, a couple scoops of my Bolognese sauce, some parsley, and maybe about a 1/4 cup of the pasta cooking liquid. I'm going to be relatively conservative with the water up front because I can always add more later if I need it. So my pasta tastes good there, it's fully cooked, so I'm going to add just a splash more pasta water to loosen things up a bit because now I'm going to shut the heat off and add some of my Parmesan cheese. And that looks good to me there, so now it's time to plate this up. I'm going to top this bowl with some freshly ground black pepper, some more parsley, a drizzle of fresh olive oil, and then a little bit more cheese. And with that, this vegetarian bolognese is done. It's super hearty and satisfying to eat. It really, in that regard, hits just the same as its traditional counterpart. It's just so delicious and comforting, and you could pretty easily adapt this into a vegan recipe if you wanted to. So I hope you give this one a try, and if you do, let me know how it goes. Thanks.